The European Union was planned long before the name was even mentioned, long before even the European Economic Community was mentioned. It goes way back. It involves the House of Rothschild, of course. If anything is happening of serious manipulation and conspiracy, then the House of Rothschild will be in there at operational level. And one of the other so-called elite families is the Hapsburgs, and of course Otto von Habsburg has been involved in the manipulation of the European Union, is now for long before, like I say, it was ever mentioned. The idea is very simple. If you are the few and you want to control the many, you have to centralize decision making, you have to centralize power. The more points of decision-making you have, the more diversity of decision-making, the less power any small cabal is going to have at the center. So the idea has been over not just hundreds of years, but thousands of years, to incessantly centralize power, to centralize decision-making. If you think back a little way, humanity was assembled, if you like, in tribes, where there were lots of tribes in these different areas of land, and the tribes were making decisions over what happened in the tribe. Then came the first major centralization operation, and that was when they turned large numbers of these tribes into different nations. And of course then you've got a situation where now a few people at the center of the nation are dictating to all the previous tribes. What the European Union is, and of course they have plans for similar structures all over the world, like they've got the African Union, they want the North American Union to be the American Union, they want the Asia-Pacific Union, but the European Union is the blueprint. And this was the next stage where they started bringing the nations together under centralized control. So now a few literal bureaucrats in Brussels are dictating to the nations of Europe. The next stage from that is a world government which would dictate to the unions. And so, as with all of these manipulations of society, you see the outcome at some point. Like now we've got this Lisbon Treaty and, you know, in effect a United States of Europe. But that's the outcome as it is at the moment. Actually, it started decades and decades and decades ago, way back in the early part of the 20th century, when all this thing was kind of orchestrated. And one of the, of course, major frontmen of the creation of the European community was Jean Monnet, who was just, and again, a frontman for these families, who was used as the orchestrator and the administrator into existence of this European economic community as it was. And he wrote to a friend in the year I was born. We're talking nearly 60 years ago, 57 years ago. And he was saying that the idea is not to tell anybody, basically, that this, what we want is a centralized superstate, in effect. But what we'll do is we'll keep incessantly moving towards that and give an economic excuse for why the different stages of more and more centralization are justified, until, as you put it, you basically pass a point where there's no return. And in effect, barring a colossal revolution, we are, in the present state of things anyway, past the point of no return. And it's just been a classic case of what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, where you start at A, you know you're going to Z, but you know if you go in gigantic leaps, then the change is so dramatic and quick that people look up and ask what's going on. So you make your leaps as much as you can get away with, but not so far that there's a big kind of reaction and acknowledgement that something very different is going on here. And they've done it brilliantly. But the way they played it in more recent times is to deny the public an opportunity to have a decision or make a decision in referendums, etc., on the incessant centralization of power that we've been seeing, because more and more people are beginning, in fact, well past beginning, to look at the European Union, the way it's going, and feel great unease about it. We saw this with the no votes for the Constitution in the Netherlands and in France, and that was a big wake-up call to the manipulators, because they realized that if you give people the opportunity to say yes or no to this creation of this United States of Europe, then overwhelmingly you're going to get a no. That is why they simply changed the name of the Constitution to the treaty and kept 98% or something of the Constitution in the treaty. It was an excuse, clearly, blatantly, obviously, not to have a rerun of the French and Dutch referendums, because they knew they would say no again, and not to have to give a referendum in the UK, where we would have massively said no, no question. The arrogance and the agenda of this cabal is such that public opinion is totally and utterly irrelevant. And if public opinion is going to say what you don't want it to say, then you do not give public opinion the chance to say it. In Ireland, of course, thanks to the Irish Constitution, they had to have a referendum on this treaty. And the Irish said no. What happens then is we can't call it something else, so we've got to get the Irish to turn over that decision. Now, you see, in a normal course of events, you have a referendum. The referendum decides, and everyone gets on with their lives. And if that referendum, that first one in Ireland, had have said yes to the treaty, that is exactly what would have happened. But as I've said many times over the years, if it's the agenda, it doesn't take no for an answer. And so you know when it's the agenda, because it will not accept the outcome of a public referendum. So we have the second one. What happens then is they go to town big time on all the areas they need to change to get a different vote. One of the things that happened in Ireland, outrageously, was the people that decide media policy and media balance policy and media bias policy in Ireland decided that in the second referendum, the television stations and the media didn't have to give equal time to the yes or no vote. They just had to give basically equal time to each party. And as only one party, Sinn Féin, was wanting to vote no, of course the massive yes vote got, Arena rather, got all the coverage. And to be honest, if that vote had not been genuinely no, and some people think it wasn't, then they would have made it so by manipulating the votes anyway, and manipulating the count, and because these people will not take no for an answer. So what we now have is a situation, outrageously, where a group of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, appointed by other bureaucrats, controlled by the elite family network, are now going to decide